But he's written an amazingly broad-minded sweep of global history, glimpses of world history. He's written an autobiography. He's written a book called The Discovery of India, which explores the entire history of India from his perspective. Remarkable, remarkable work, and amazing mind. And after he was free of the threat of British imprisonment, his literary output dwindled. All we have from him is speeches and letters. We don't have books anymore.
His 5-volume letters to the Chief Minister is an excellent work of statecraft.
That's right.
And for example, Dr. Pandit Nehru travels to Pathankot to inaugurate some, the indigenous people's, festival. And then he writes to the, all the chief ministers at that time. Some of the chief ministers were referred as a prime ministers because there was still changes were coming in. And he describes beautifully why the chief minister or prime minister in the South India need to understand. He was connecting. And I could see a connectedness of an imagination of India, which you also wrote a small book on a Nehru called Invention.
Nehru, the Invention of India. Yeah.
So I think the politicians, as a writer to me, is an imaginative writer. So it's a work of fiction at the same time, it's
a work of creativity, but not of fiction, because fiction has to be completely a work of the imagination. But Nehru was extremely creative, and he had literary flair. Even his own will is really so beautifully written, it could have been written by an accomplished novelist. I mean, the description of the Ganga River and what it means to him and why he wants his ashes to be immersed partly there is an amazing work of literary writing. So there is an amazing quality there to his writing. But all the political writers in India, you're right, are first politicians and only secondarily writers, and much of their writing has been to serve their politics. Whereas you're right that in my case, it went the other way. I wasn't in politics till 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago. And having been somebody who had written and published a dozen books before getting into the political arena, a lot of people thought that that would be the end of my output. I have been writing since, but I've been writing much more material that's related to my political preoccupations. And that tends to be unavoidable, because what happens very often is that when you want to write, in any case, anything, you need time, and time is scarce for a politician, particularly an elected politician who has constituents making demands on him. But then there's also the challenge that with fiction, you need not only time, but to create a space inside your head to invent an alternative world, an alternative universe, populated with characters, episodes, dialogue, incidents, which should be as real to you while you're composing it as the world in which you're living and functioning. Now that's possible if you can keep the two worlds fairly clearly apart, and where the other world doesn't intrude on the first when you are immersed in the first. But it seems to me that the impossibility of writing good fiction or good literary fiction for a politician, as it indeed became the case towards the latter part of my UN career as well, is that when even your evenings and weekends are not sacrosanct, when anytime you sit down to re-enter that illusory world, the illusion can be shattered at any moment by the ring of the bell or the ring of the telephone that you can't afford to ignore, then the composition of fiction becomes truly difficult. And so my last 15 years have been littered with novels of, I think, considerable promise, which I had to abandon, because when you have interruptions too much, the illusion gets shattered and it cannot be rebuilt again. So I have at least 4 begun novels which I'm afraid are sort of unsuccessful, incomplete and abandoned. But I've been in the meantime producing columns, essays and non-fiction books. I'm quite proud of the one you mentioned, Pax Indica, which is my second book on foreign policy. The first one you bought more than 30 years ago. But this one is a book which, oh my gosh, I'm very touched. Yes, that is the one book of mine that is out of print. So hold on to the copy, because I'm told that on Amazon you can only get it for $40. And I think it was originally published for under $5. So being out of print can be an advantage to the